Professor Zixnor of the Galactic Academy of Interspecies Relations stood before his class, his tentacles quivering with what he hoped was an air of authority. It was hard to tell sometimes, given that half the species in the room interpreted tentacle quivering as a sign of gastrointestinal distress. "Today, class," he burbled through his speech gills, "we embark on the most thrilling, the most daring exercise in your academic careers." He paused for dramatic effect, which was somewhat undermined by a Gleason student in the back row choosing that moment to loudly expel gas through its blowhole. Zixnor's eye stalk swiveled in irritation before he continued, "You will be divided into teams and sent to the wilds of Epsilon V for a survival exercise." His tentacles waved in what he imagined was an exciting manner. "You'll face the elements, forage for sustenance, and work together to overcome nature's challenges." A chorus of groans echoed through the classroom, punctuated by the distinct sound of a Vogon's forehead connecting with its desk. "Oh, come now," Zixnor chided, his voice a mixture of exasperation and forced enthusiasm. "It's not like we're sending you to a Deathworlder or anything." He chuckled at his own joke, a sound reminiscent of a malfunctioning garbage disposal. From the back of the room, a hand shot up. It belonged to the only human in the class, Sarah Jenkins. Zixnor's eye stalks drooped slightly. He'd been hoping she wouldn't volunteer. "Yes, Sarah?" he asked, resignation coloring his words. Sarah stood up, her 5'6" frame towering over most of her alien classmates. "Professor, I'd like to lead one of the teams," she said, her voice filled with an enthusiasm that made Zixnor's stomachs churn. The professor's tentacles twisted into what passed for a grimace in his species. "Are you sure, Sarah? Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a supportive role?" Sarah's eyebrow arched so high it threatened to escape her forehead entirely. "With all due respect, Professor, I grew up camping in the Australian outback. I think I can handle a simple survival exercise." Zixnor's eye stalk swiveled to his teaching assistant, Blorp, who was frantically waving all 7 of his appendages in a clear abort mission gesture. But it was too late. The words were already falling out of Zixnor's speech gills like particularly stubborn pieces of seaweed. "Very well, Sarah. You can lead Team Alpha." As Sarah grinned and returned to her seat, Zixnor couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a terrible mistake. He glanced at his class roster, noting the diverse mix of species that would be on Sarah's team. A methane-breathing Jupiterian, a silicon-based Andromedian, a gelatinous blob from Betelgeuse, and a photosynthetic chlorophyllian. What could possibly go wrong? He muttered to himself, blissfully unaware of the chaos that was about. The transport ship touched down on Epsilon V with all the grace of a drunken Centaurian elephant. As the doors hissed open, Sarah was the first to bound out, her eyes sparkling with an excitement that made her alien teammates deeply "All right, team," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together. "Let's get this survival party started." Gloop, the blob from Betelgeuse, oozed down the ramp after her, its gelatinous body jiggling with each movement. "I fail to see how this qualifies as a party," it burbled skeptically. Sarah grinned, an expression that showed far too many teeth for the comfort of her non-human companions. "Oh, Gloop, my friend, you've clearly never been to an Australian bush doof. Now that's a party." The chlorophyllinated photosyn unfurled its leaves and turned towards the alien sun. "I require approximately 3.7 hours of direct sunlight to maintain optimal function," it stated matter-of-factly. "Great," Sarah enthused. "You can be our solar-powered GPS, just don't get too crispy." Methania, the Jupiterian, let out a series of gaseous whooshes that her universal translator rendered as, "This atmosphere is painfully oxygen-rich. I may asphyxiate at any moment." Sarah nodded sagely. "Fair point. We'll need to find you a nice, sulfurous bog to bubble in. I'm sure there's one around here somewhere. It'll be just like a spa day." The Andromedian, Silicon, tapped its crystalline fingers together nervously. "The humidity levels here are concerning. I fear I may start to grow moss." "Brilliant," Sarah exclaimed. "Built-in camouflage. You're really getting into the spirit of things, Silicon." As Sarah marched off into the alien wilderness, her mismatched team trailing behind her with varying degrees of reluctance. None of them noticed the small drone hovering nearby, broadcasting their every move back to the Galactic Academy. In the control room, Professor Zixnor and his teaching assistant Blorp watched the screens with a mixture of fascination and horror. "She seems enthusiastic," Blorp commented, his voice pitched higher than usual. Zixnorp's tentacles were tied in knots. "Enthusiastic. She's treating it like some sort of deranged holiday. Look at her go." On the screen, they watched as Sarah fashioned a spear from a fallen branch, using a sharp rock to hone the tip. She brandished it triumphantly, causing her teammates to recoil in alarm. Is that allowed?" Blorp asked, his 7 eyes blinking rapidly. Zixnorp consulted the rulebook, flipping through pages with increasing desperation. "There's nothing specifically prohibiting it," he admitted, "though I'm fairly certain the intent of forage for sustenance didn't include hunting local wildlife with home." They watched in stunned silence as Sarah demonstrated various survival techniques to her team. She showed Gloop how to filter water through its gelatinous body, taught Photosyn how to angle its leaves for maximum sunlight exposure while still keeping watch for predators, and helped Silicon find a dry cave to prevent unwanted moss growth. "You have to admit," Blorp said hesitantly, "she's quite resourceful." Zixnorp's eye stalks drooped. "That's what I'm afraid of." Back on Epsilon V, Sarah was in her element. She moved through the alien landscape with the confidence of someone who found the constant threat of death by unidentified flora or fauna to be a delightful challenge rather than a deterrent. "Right, team," she called out, her voice carrying a worrying level of cheer. "Time to set up camp for the night. Gloop, I need you on perimeter duty. Any nasties try to sneak up on us, you just absorb them or something?" Gloop gurgled uncertainly. "I am not sure my digestive enzymes are compatible with local life." Sarah waved off the concern. "Only one way to find out, eh? Think of it as a gastronomic adventure." Turning to the Andromedian, she grinned. "Silicon, you're our early warning system. Those crystal bits of yours should resonate nicely if anything big comes stomping our way." Silicon's crystalline structure vibrated in what might have been a nod, or possibly just structure. "Photosyn," Sarah continued, "I need you to photosynthesize like you've never photosynthesized before. We'll need all the oxygen you can pump out to keep methania from floating away." Photosyn's leaves twitched in what might have been a salute, or possibly an involuntary spasm. "And methania," Sarah said, turning to the gaseous Jupiterian. "You've got the most important job of all." Methania expanded slightly with anticipation. "I do, absolutely." Sarah nodded solemnly. "You're our fart detector. Any strange smells, any odd gases, you let us know immediately. Could be the difference between a good night's sleep and waking up in the digestive tract of some alien megafauna." As her team dispersed to their assigned tasks, each looking more bewildered than the last, Sarah stood in the center of their makeshift camp, hands on hips, surveying her domain. She took a deep breath of the alien air, grinning widely. She sighed contentedly, just like Schoolie's week in Bali, but with 100 more chance of being eaten by something with too many teeth. Brilliant. In the control room, Zixnor and Blorp watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and horror. Did she just weaponize her team's natural abilities? Blorp asked, his voice a mixture of admiration and fear. Zixnor's tentacles were now so tightly knotted that he feared he might never untangle them. "I believe the correct term is a tactically repurposed," he said weakly. On the screen, they watched as Sarah began constructing what appeared to be a series of elaborate traps around the campsite. "What in the name of the Galactic Council is she doing now?" Zixnorp exclaimed. Blorp squinted at the screen. "If I'm not mistaken, Professor, those appear to be booby traps." Zixnorp's eye stalk swiveled so fast, he nearly gave himself whiplash. "Booby traps. But this is supposed to be a simple survival exercise. Where in the curriculum does it call for booby traps?" Blorp shrugged all 7 of his shoulders. "To be fair, sir, you did tell them to overcome nature's challenges. Perhaps Jenkins is simply being..." As if on cue, the sound of Sarah's voice came through the speakers, cheerfully explaining to her teammates the finer points of constructing a pit trap. "Now remember," she was saying, "the key is to make the bottom extra pointy. We want whatever falls in to have a really memorable experience." "Yeah?" Zixnorp felt a headache coming on. It was going to be a long night. As darkness fell on Epsilon V, Sarah's team huddled around a small fire. She had somehow managed to start using nothing but 2 rocks and what appeared to be Gloop's droppings. "All right, gang," Sarah said, her face eerily illuminated by the flickering flames. "Time for some good old-fashioned campfire stories." Her alien teammates exchanged nervous glances. "I am unfamiliar with this Earth custom," Silicon admitted, its crystalline structure reflecting the firelight in dazzling patterns. Sarah's grin widened, taking on a slightly maniacal edge. "Oh, it's simple, really. We take turns telling scary stories to, lighten the mood." Photosyn's leaves drooped slightly. "I fail to see how inducing fear will improve our emotion." "Trust me," Sarah said, waving off the concern. "There's nothing like a good scare to make you appreciate being alive." "Now, who wants to go first?" When no one volunteered, Sarah shrugged. "All right, I'll kick things off. Let me tell you about the time I went walkabout in the outback and ran into a pack of dingoes." As Sarah launched into her tale, complete with enthusiastic hand gestures and alarmingly accurate animal noises, her teammates huddled closer together, their alien physiologies expressing various states of distress. Gloop began to lose cohesion, small droplets of its gelatinous form splattering on the ground. Methania's gaseous form fluctuated wildly, causing small whirlwinds to form around the campsite. Silicon's crystalline structure vibrated at a frequency that made everyone's teeth or equivalent mouth parts ache, while Photosyn's leaves curled inward, as if trying to shield itself from Sarah's words. "And that's when I realized," Sarah was saying, her voice dropped to a dramatic whisper, "the dingoes weren't running from something. They were running with something, and that something was now right behind me." A sudden rustle in the nearby bushes caused the entire team to jump. Gloop lost all cohesion and melted into a puddle, while Methania expanded so rapidly she nearly floated away. Sarah, on the other hand, leapt to her feet with a whoop of excitement. "Ripper," she exclaimed. "Looks like we've got some company. Who's up for a bit of night hunting?" Her teammates stared at her in horror as she grabbed her homemade spear and charged into the darkness, her maniacal laughter echoing through the alien forest. In the control room, Zixnorp and Blorp watched the scene unfold with a mixture of fascination and dread. "Should we intervene?" Blorp asked hesitantly. Zixnorp's tentacles were now so tightly knotted that he resembled a particularly distressed ball of yarn, and risked becoming part of whatever madness she's cooking up out there. "I think." They watched as Sarah emerged from the forest, dragging behind her what appeared to be a large, unconscious alien creature. It resembled nothing so much as a cross between a porcupine and a small elephant, with a liberal sprinkling of tentacles thrown in for good measure. "Look what I found." Sarah's voice came through the speakers, filled with an enthusiasm that made both Zixnorp and Blorp shudder. "Dinner and a new friend. All friend," Blorp echoed weakly. Zixnorp's eye stalks drooped. "I have a feeling her definition of friend might differ slightly from ours." On the screen, they watched as Sarah began to instruct her team on the finer points of alien creature butchery, using her spear with an alarmingly practiced hand. "Now, the trick is to avoid the poison sacs," she was saying cheerfully, "unless, of course, you want to make some blow darts, in which case, bonus." Zixnorp turned away from the screen, his coloration shifting to a sickly green. "I don't think I can watch this anymore." Blorp, however, seemed unable to tear his eyes away. "It's like a grav train wreck," he muttered, horrifying yet somehow. As the alien sun began to rise on Epsilon V, bathing the landscape in an eerie purple glow, Sarah's team emerged from their makeshift shelter looking surprisingly alive. Sarah stretched her arms above her head, a satisfied grin on her face. "Well, team, I'd say that was a successful first night. Who's ready for some breakfast?" I'm thinking alien porcupine elephant omelets for teammates who had spent the night in various states of terror-induced catatonia, stared at her with a mixture of awe and fear. Gloop, who had only recently managed to pull itself back into a vaguely blob-like shape, gurgled weakly. "I believe I may have developed a new phobia of sleep." Methania, still slightly overinflated from the night's excitement, let out a series of small, distressed whooshes. "I have experienced sensations I did not know my gaseous form was capable of feeling." Silicon, whose crystalline structure was now vibrating at a frequency that made small pebbles dance around its feet, chimed in. "I believe I now understand the human concept of emotional scarring." Photosyn, whose leaves were still tightly curled, added, "I find myself longing for the simple days of absorbing sunlight and not fearing for my chlorophyll-based existence." Sarah beamed at them all, completely oblivious to their distress. "That's the spirit. Nothing like a bit of mortal peril to get the blood pumping, eh? Now who wants to learn how to make a water filter out of alien porcupine quills and Gloop's digestive juices?" Gloop shuddered visibly, causing small ripples to run across its gelatinous surface. As Sarah bustled about the campsite, humming cheerfully and occasionally pausing to sharpen her spear on a convenient rock, her alien teammates huddled together in a small, terrified cluster. "Is this normal for humans?" Silicon whispered, its crystalline voice tinged with static. Methania expanded slightly in what might have been a shrug. "I have heard stories of human resilience, but this seems excessive." Photosyn's leaves rustled in agreement. "Perhaps we should request an evacuation. Surely this qualifies as an extreme circumstance." Gloop, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly burbled excitedly. "Wait, I have an idea. What if we—" But before Gloop could finish its thought, Sarah's voice rang out across the campsite. "Oi team, who's up for a bit of exploration? I've got a hankering to climb that ominous-looking mountain over there." The aliens turned as one to look at the mountain in question. It loomed in the distance, its peak shrouded in swirling, acidic-looking clouds. Occasional flashes of what might have been lightning, or possibly the attacks of some monstrous flying creature, lit up the mountainside. "Surely she jests," Silicon said weakly. Sarah appeared beside them, grinning from ear to ear. "No jest, mate. Nothing like a good death-defying climb to really bond a team together. Now, who wants to be my climbing buddy?" 4 pairs of alien eyes, or sensory organs approximating eyes, widened in horror. Back in the control room, Professor Zykesnorp and Blorp watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. "She can't be serious," Zykesnorp muttered, his tentacles twisted into knots so complex they'd make a sailor weep. "That mountain is home to the Shrieking Clawed Horrors of Epsilon V. It's strictly off-limits." Blorp, who had long since given up on maintaining any semblance of professional detachment, was stress-eating from a bag of dehydrated nurgleberries. "5 credits says she tries to tame one," he said around a mouthful of fluorescent purple snacks. Zykesnorp's eye stalk swiveled to glare at his assistant. "This isn't a betting matter, Blorp. We need to intervene before." He was cut off by Sarah's voice coming through the speakers. "Right then, Gloop, you're up. Your squishy body will be perfect for absorbing any falls. Let's get this show on the road." The 2 aliens watched in horrified fascination as Sarah began to scale the mountain, dragging a very reluctant Gloop behind her. The rest of the team followed at a much more sedate pace, their movements suggesting they were seriously considering the merits of desertion. "Should we send in the extraction team?" Blorp asked, his voice muffled by nurgleberries. Zykesnorp's tentacles waved in frustration and risk them getting caught up in whatever this is. "No, we wait. Surely even a Deathworlder has limits." As if in direct challenge to his words, they watched Sarah fearlessly swing across a chasm, using what appeared to be a vine made of braided alien porcupine quills. By the great galactic void, Zykesnorp breathed. "What have we unleashed?" Halfway up the mountain, Sarah's team huddled on a narrow ledge, taking shelter from the acidic rain that had begun to fall. Well, most of the team huddled. Sarah stood at the edge, arms spread wide, face tilted up to the corrosive downpour. "Now this is what I call a shower," she shouted over the hiss of dissolving rock. "Really gets into their teammates, who had fashioned makeshift umbrellas out of large leaves kindly donated by a very reluctant Photosyn, stared at her in mute horror. Is it too late to request a transfer to a nice, safe, black hole study program? Silicon asked no one in particular. And Methani, who was having a hard time maintaining cohesion in the acidic atmosphere, let out a mournful whoosh. "I am beginning to suspect that the true survival exercise is surviving our team leader." Sarah turned back to them, her skin slightly reddened, but her grin as wide as ever. "Come on, team. Where's your sense of adventure? We're nearly at the Shrieking Clawed Horror nesting grounds." 4 pairs of alien eyes, or equivalent sensory organs, widened in alarm. The what nesting grounds?" Gloop burbled, its gelatinous form quivering more than usual. Sarah's grin took on a slightly maniacal edge. Oh, didn't I mention? This mountain is home to the most feared predators on Epsilon V. Brutal killing machines with razor-sharp claws, venomous fangs, and a battle cry that can liquefy bones. Should be a right laugh trying to sneak past them, eh? There was a moment of stunned silence, broken only by the sizzle of acidic rain on rock. Then, as one, Sarah's alien teammates turned and began to scramble back down the mountain, their movements fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. Sarah watched them go, her expression a mixture of confusion and disappointment. Was it something I said? She called after them. In the control room, Snorpy and Blorp watched the chaos unfold with a sense of inevitability. Well, Blorp said, licking Nurgleberry dust off his tentacles. I suppose that's one way to end a survival exercise. Snorp's eye stalks drooped. End it, Blorp. I fear this is only the beginning. Look. On the screen, they watched as Sarah, undeterred by her team's desertion, continued to scale the mountain alone. Brilliant. Her voice came through the speakers, filled with an enthusiasm that made both aliens shudder. Always wanted to try solo mountaineering. Wonder if I can fashion a hang glider out of Shrieking Clawed Horror wings. Only one way to find out. Snor's tentacles went limp with defeat. Blorf, he said wearily, prepare the extraction team. And perhaps alert the Galactic Council. I have a feeling we're going to need to update our simple survival exercise protocols as they watched Sarah disappear into the mist surrounding the mountain's peak, her laughter echoing ominously. Both aliens couldn't help but feel a grudging admiration for the sheer, terrifying resilience of humanity. You know, Blorp said thoughtfully, perhaps we should consider offering a new course next semester. Something along the lines of advanced Deathworld survival techniques. A human's guide to thriving where everything wants to kill you. Snor's eye stalks perked up slightly. Not a bad idea, Blorp. Though perhaps we should wait and see if Sarah makes it back alive before we start planning the curriculum. Just then, a blood-curdling shriek echoed from the speakers, followed by Sarah's delighted whoop, crikey. Her voice rang out. These beasties are even better than drop bears. Who wants a selfie with Mama Horror? Snorp and Blorp exchanged a look of resigned horror. On second thought, Snorp said weakly, perhaps we should just stick to xenobotany next semester. As Sarah's continued whoops of joy mixed with the terrifying shrieks of Epsilon V's apex predators, both aliens couldn't help but wonder. In a universe full of terrifying creatures, were humans perhaps the most terrifying of all? The answer, echoing from the mist-shrouded peak of a deadly alien mountain, seemed to be a resounding enthusiastic. And somewhere in the vast, uncaring cosmos, the spirit of Steve Irwin smiled proudly.